Hello and welcome. Two logistic announcements. First, it would be nice if you concentrate more to the center, because otherwise we're looking partly into empty chairs. It would be very nice for the atmosphere and also for the energy in terms of looking into each other's eyes. Second, unfortunately, it will get a bit warm. That has to be accepted. That's the condition of the room. We are not allowed to open the windows. That's the rule of the house. And we go with it. So thank you for being here. Thank you, guys, for being here. We are going to dive into a topic that is somehow precious in different forms around Europe and beyond. It's journalism and its current state embedded in democracy. And yeah, we're embedded in the Impact Days. We did a similar thing last year, and this year we would like to discuss impact investment and journalism, its relationship. So we talk about money, we talk about models, we talk about impact. Thank you very much for being here, Martin, with the Media Forward Fund, Lot Carlier, yeah. Yes, with Veronica, Stichting Veronica from Amsterdam, and Peter Erdelyi from Budapest, with the Sustainable Media Institute for Sustainable Media. But he will introduce himself. You can even start like right now, introduce yourself and what your organization is up to.
Okay. Hi, I'm Peter from Budapest. I run an organization called the Center for Sustainable Media. And it's a small organization, otherwise known as a boutique organization. I like the sound of that a little more. We do three things. We work directly with publishers in Europe, mostly in Central Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, but we have some clients elsewhere in Switzerland and some other European countries, and we work with them on business development and how to help them generate more revenues. This mostly means audience revenues, so donations, subscriptions, memberships, but sometimes it meant commercial partnerships, like how to get advertisers. This is around 40% of what we do. Another 40% would be large international, mostly EU-funded media development projects. So the EU spends some money on journalism every year, and we are part of that ecosystem that tries to make sure that that money is used for meaningful projects. And then another 20% of the work is, let's say, advocacy at the EU level to make sure that the European legislation around funding makes sense. And also we work with some large investors, international investors like MDIF, which invests money in media, and we help them make sure they invest in the right companies. I think I'm going to...
Yeah, hi, I'm Lot Carlier. I'm from Stichting Veronica. In the Netherlands, we were a media company, a very rebellious media company. We were broadcasting from extraterritorial waters in the Netherlands. Well, not in the Netherlands, to be exact. For 20 years or something, until we were accepted in the broadcasting public system. And well, we tried to keep that rebellious mind a little bit. But in the meantime, we sold off all the media assets and ended up with an endowment fund, so it's kind of a luxury. So the returns on the capital is being invested in and donated to companies and people that contribute to the strength of the journalistic ecosystem. So since 8 years, we are focusing on Europe. Before that, it was only the Netherlands. And well, we try to invest both commercially and also donate. So it's kind of, we're working towards a blended return, but I will talk a little bit more about that later.
I'm Martin. A year ago, exactly at the Impact Days, we launched Media Forward Fund. It's a philanthropic collaboration of foundations and impact investors and also public entities. which work together to fund journalism. We don't fund the daily business, daily operations, business as usual. We fund business model development because we want to help journalism to get out of this current transformation crisis and come up with new business models which are actually helping them grow and also sustain themselves in the future. Since then, since last year, we had 2 calls and 250 applications came in, and so far we funded 4, 2 of them in Switzerland, 2 of them in Austria, and so far none in Germany. But this will, hopefully, the jury will come together in July again for their next decisions, and then I think we will have grantees in all 3 countries.
And maybe you could also tell the size of your fund, like with you last year when you started it was around 25?
No, that was the goal.
That
That
was
was
the
still
goal.
the goal. It would be great to be there. We started with 6 million, now we are at roughly 10.
Okay. For a certain amount of years or per year?
For 3 years.
For 3 years. And Veronica?
Yeah, we don't mention the amount
Okay.
of our total capital, but we
I
do
tried.
spend like about 3 to 4 million per year.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for having Peter, how much are you spending per year?
I can tell MDIF is spending a lot.
Yeah, they are.
Thank you for especially you two making the way to Vienna and Martin to be here. Also nice to have an Austrian leading the fund for the whole German-speaking market. I'm organizing and hosting this panel as a media entrepreneur myself and a strategic consultant in the journalism and media area. I'm involved in local journalism, media finance, and media policy, entrepreneurial journalism. And yeah, let's dive straight into it. I'd like to very basically know what's the status quo of the media landscape, starting from Central Eastern Europe or Europe in general. What are the core issues of the legacy media world and on the other side of the independent world? And maybe Martin, you want to start.
Okay. Well, there's a transformation crisis going on because the print model, which used to work for a long time, is now under big pressure. And there are not enough business models out there which can replace print. There will never be one business model you can just plug in and get rid of the print model and then you're fine. You need much more smaller models to replace your print income at some point. And for journalism, there was not really a lot of need to innovate on the business side because money just came in. You printed a newspaper, you delivered it, people put ads in there, and then the money came in. So
you almost printed money.
yeah,
like
so for a while it was like that. And some papers, they really turned down ads because they didn't fit anymore into the letterboxes. So that was a while ago. But since then, it really, with more than 50% of all ad money going into Google, Facebook, and others, away from media organizations, it's now more complicated for them to finance their journalism, which is very expensive. You need so many people to run a really good news organization. It's really costly. So you really need more business models which are actually lacking. So and this is not only true to the DACH region for Germany, Austria, Switzerland, that's basically everywhere. And we see it, especially in this region, we see it in 2 places where it's really rapidly going downhill. One of them is the French-speaking part of Switzerland, Romandie, Geneva. Over there, you can really, when I started the fund a year ago, it was quite vibrant, and now you just see how all these news organizations are just dying or getting or cutting jobs and costs. The same is going on in Eastern Germany. These regions, there are already some places where you can say there's only one news organization left, And if this one goes downhill too, there is just no journalism left. And this is what happened in the US. In the US, there are already, we call them news deserts. There is just no journalism there. And what happens if there is no journalism? There is corruption, people are not informed or misinformed, their voting patterns turn much more into the extremes. There is a direct effect. So that's why we do that. We want to prevent that from happening in the German-speaking region by helping, especially in these places where news desertification is showing.
Yeah, we'd love to add to that because there, of course, we see this concentration also. So just a couple of media companies are still self-sufficient, can still be profitable, and this concentration is also a danger for for democracy and rule of law because one is not enough. So what we see also in the very rich countries like the Netherlands, Germany, but there's not a lot pluriformity left. So that's also an additional issue. And then the United States, for example, and big donors saw this problem and they started giving money away, a lot of money away, and European donors, they came to the help, to the rescue. So a lot of money was available, a lot of new entities were founded by investigative journalists and these kind of things. So pluriformity was thriving. But then again, they were all very reliant on these donors and were not building business models. So when, a couple of years ago, big donors shifted their attention, like OSF and they shifted their attention, for example, to Asia or South America, in Central Eastern Europe and in the rest of it, they were like, oh, okay, what are we going to do now? And they just fell down. And there was nothing left. So this is an additional problem in the sector. Of course, we're also coming with solutions later, but this is really an urgent thing that we should take a look at as impact investment ecosystem.
More bad news before the solution. So I think there was a wave of disruptions because of big technology companies being dominant in the advertising space. But also these companies began to control means of distribution. So the traffic that sort of sustains media companies come through these platform companies and they, in that they also have a dominant position. And this made, I think, globally the position of media companies, even the ones that did some digital transformation, a bit contentious. On top of this, in certain Central Eastern European countries like Hungary and Poland until recently, and maybe some others, there's an added layer of interference by governments, local governments, various powerful political actors that want to sort of use media as a tool to further their own political interest. So this is, I think, an even sort of more contentious or more complex situation in some of these countries. And I think this has been a difficult sort of proposition for a while now, but there was still the US, I think it's still worth mentioning that not in sort of Western Europe, but in Central Eastern Europe, and especially outside the global North, the US, through various programs, spent a considerable amount of money on journalism. This was, let's say, 50% of all the public sector support for journalism came from the US through various entities. With the new US administration coming in this January, the first thing was to stop all the foreign aid programs, including the ones that supported journalism, which now created this huge emergency for, in Europe, this means mostly Eastern Europe and Southeast Europe, the Balkans countries, and outside Europe, great many places where US public sector support was the last thing that these outlets could rely on. And with the advertising market already disrupted, with the means of distribution controlled by platforms, it really created a difficult position where I think we are still not even seeing yet the kind of the depth of devastation that is going to result from these new policy changes. So now we can move on to solutions.
Just one other layer is like existing media outlets like fired their journalists based on cutting costs. In the same time, we have more and more information actually, but it's just not information that is based on standard and ethics that we're used to journalism when we get it delivered. It's just more of an abstract thing that we will realize what it is missing when it's not there anymore. But right now it's on fire, but still the urgency is not has not arrived at every part of every pocket, so to say. But let's dive into like what are you investing in and how are you doing it in terms of or let's first ask one more question, which was raised last year in a similar penny, which was like, why does journalism cost money at all? Like, you can produce journalism very easily, sit down, write the text, publish it online. So why do you even need money? Maybe you could answer this very simple but not so simple question first, and then we dive in.
Well, I used to run 2 news organizations, and I can tell you from the budget that the most expensive part is just personnel. A newsroom is just staffed by people. News organizations don't really have much except their talents, their people, and that's their #1 cost. And if you want to have people who are competent in their field and know if something happens and can investigate, you need to train them, you need to have them on staff, and you will need them now, not in a few days, and so you have to have them there. And also if you want to run a 24-hour news organization, regardless in which country, regardless how large the country is, you always need a certain amount of people to just be there in the newsroom, to have the people there every time something happens. And this is really a little bit easier in larger countries because it's easier to refinance that. But in smaller countries like Austria, you have the costs, but you have a much smaller market to refinance it. So it's really a cost game, basically. And that's what many news stations do. The first thing they do is cut costs. And that's not really a strategy.
Yeah, and in addition to staff, of course, tech costs increasingly, because now I think the average news organization is spending 30% of all costs on tech, and this is growing in a very high speed. So that's really, and again, you know, Austria is a small country, but there are other countries where people are not willing to pay for content at all. So we really need very diverse business models to, you know, to create any income and keep on going and keep on doing the things you're doing. So.
And there's marketing, of course. So if you're a startup in a news organization, I would say the content is just half of the rent. The other part is marketing, because you need to build your reach first before you can maybe find a model that sustains yourself. But yeah, that's the cost. So what are you like as being on the front? What are business models? Examples of business models you are diving into or investing into and discussing about?
Yeah, well, we have kind of a very, you know, unique model, because we wanted to support journalism, but we also want to have a modest return with our, you know, portfolio in total. So we decided to fund newsrooms directly, especially investigative journalism, because we see it's so important, especially the mid and smaller size, for this pluriformity I was already mentioning before. We fund news targeted at the new generations. It's not even new anymore, but I mean, there's such a big divide between, you know, younger than 30 and older than 30. I mean, maybe it's now already 35. It's going very quickly, and we need to grapple what new models can be to reach these target groups. And we look also at very local media. So these are the newsrooms, and these are, of course, kind of, you know, they have very low returns compared to other possibilities to tech investments and those kind of things. So we also decided to really commercially invest in infrastructural companies, like tech companies focusing on editorial analysis, tech companies focusing on database tools for journalists. So it's a very broad spectrum, and the combination of all these things makes that you can come to a modest return.
What is the modest return?
Yeah, well, that's of course a difficult question, but I think if you do this right, so we are also entrepreneurial, so this is kind of strange. So I was already talking to Martin. We're very happy with this fund because they are building, a pipeline for my investments, But now in this smaller and mid-sized media companies market, there are not a lot of investable companies. So we also consult these smaller companies, and then we fund with donations and later with loans the way towards new revenue streams. So this is of course not very profitable. So we take this into the mix because we are an endowment fund. But if you take these out, you can really get, I think, to 7 to 15% with these blended.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sure. But because there's a mix, bigger companies, of course, are much easier to fund, but also the mid-sized and the ones that are coming from the funds from Martin. And high hopes.
He pays it and you get the 50%.
Yeah. So of course it's a longer term game also. So you don't need, you won't be able to say, okay, we have an investment horizon of 5 years or something, or 7 years. But I think you should really think about 10 years and keep on, supporting the companies you're in, because it's also a kind of a cycle they're going through, and especially now with all these developments in AI.
Can you give us 2 examples of journalistic ventures you are supporting over the years, or supporting investing, and with which kind of tickets? Size?
Yeah, so we are very, very flexible. So we go from like 50,000 euros to 1.5 million for the first tranche. But it also depends, of course. If it's a media company, we're up till now supporting smaller companies. And you can think about Apache, it's an investigative journalism, very small, in Belgium. We're connected to Mensagem in Lisbon. We're investing in, and a couple of I can't mention because they're in exile also. We have Screenshot Media, but I don't know if you know it, it's in the UK, it's targeted at Gen XYZ. We have Jamsey, it's in the Netherlands, targeted as XYZ. So it's a very mixed portfolio, and they're all in different phases of their development. So some of them are already having loans, which they pay back or we convert. And some of them are still in the consultancy phase with a donation.
Martin, would you add to?
Sure. Well, we created a fund because there is a high barrier of entry into funding media, because it's so complicated to understand the media market, then to pick the right ones. And then it's also very risky, not only for the outcome, but also politically. Because if you fund a media organization that kind of has a mission drift and moves somewhere, and they make an error, for example, then it's you as the funder who is immediately in the spotlight, and it's a reputational risk. So many people came together when we created the fund and said, we want to do something about media, it's important for our democracy, but we just don't know how. And also, if we knew how, we have to put our efforts together, because we really need to make a big impact here. It's really a big crisis, and if each one of us does it alone, we will only go so far. So that's the reason why there is this fund. There are now 18 funders, and some of them have never funded journalism before. It's kind of a learning journey for all of us. We share our resources from only 3 countries, we have the benchmarks, and so we kind of teach ourselves how to do it in the right way. So if someone thinks about doing something about the journalism crisis and wants to invest, something that you said before, there are actually not that many investable cases. There are many organizations which have really good approaches, and they have a proof of concept, they have a product market fit, but now they lack the money to really show that this is an investment case. And that's where the money is needed. So we decided we are not going to fund in the idea phase, because there is actually enough public funding in most countries. And we are not funding, of course, as an impact investors, because there are people out there doing that. We have to bridge the gap in between. We have to help these organizations to move from the idea stage to the investment stage. And we give them kind of growth money after they have shown that there is a proof of concept. So they really have to show us the numbers and show us their trajectory if they had our money. And then we give it as a donation, it's philanthropic money. And then impact investors like Sebastian Klein from Karma Capital is aligned with us and is actually a co-owner of the fund. And they get access to these grantees, and they see if the team works, if the model can actually happen, and after that they can invest. So we kind of, as you said, we have to first build kind of a pipeline to investment, because there's just not enough money in the market so far to help these organizations grow.
But it's like a pipeline on both sides, right? So there is a market development on the capital side and on the venture side. But maybe Peter, could you line out a bit like how these new wave of journalistic organizations are looking like? Like, are these organizations of 100 people, or like how can we imagine what we're talking about when they're next generation media companies? If you
Sure. Just one more note on the previous discussion. I think the people we work with, there is like people like the European Commission that invest. So this is not investment, that's a grant. That's like Media Forward. It's they give the money and they don't need it back. Those kind of entities tend to be more invested in the mission. So they don't, sometimes they care about returns, but as long as you can show that you are running a media company in a news desert, serving some underserved community, you have a decent shot at getting European money. Of course, you need to be large enough, and there are some other caveats there. And then there is this spectrum where you have these mission-driven investors or funders on one end, and then you move toward more people that care about returns. And then there is impact investment in the middle, like Veronica or like MDIF, that wants to see good journalism and wants the mission of good journalism, but also wants to see
a modest return.
Up to 15%.
The modest return.
We don't. It's not a requirement.
I'm sorry. Some return, and then of course there is financial markets, but journalism, risk versus reward, has like for the past, I think, 25 years never made sense in like a purely VC, like I put in money and then this is going to be my return and it's going to be a good case. Because journalism is always, as Martin said, too risky. This is why you see pooled funds like Media Forward, like Civitates, where a bunch of actors get together and say, oh, it's not me who's funding the media company that is pestering your government. It's this group, I have nothing to do with the decision. So this is kind of on the funding side. And on what the new organization look like, I think there is still a mix, but right now, I think it's very difficult to make a pitch, whether it's a grant or an impact investor or a VC. For me to start a newsroom that was kind of common, let's say again, 30 years ago, with lots of people, with lots of infrastructure already in place. You see new, very lean organizations. Sometimes it's just one person. Maybe it's a group of 3 or 5 people. They use technology can be expensive, but there is also cheap-ish technology, like publishing technology can also be cheap. Monetization, getting people to pay for journalism. Digitally, this was a big technical problem. It was difficult to get people to give their credit card number. This changed over the past, let's say, 5 years. This technology became a lot cheaper. So a lot more type of organizations and newsrooms that had no shot 10 years ago, asking for audience revenues, now have the means to do this. Whether they have a good enough product, that of course is a different question, whether they have a good enough product team to have them through the mechanism, but the technology I think is there. So you see small organization, very direct relationships with the audiences. Very few people are into advertising these days, exactly because of what we described, because that's dominated by big tech. Most of the business models are sort of hinging on some form of audience revenue, and then maybe some other services, webinars, whatever. Next to it, it's really, I think, a new and in some ways exciting frontier. I think it's important to. Big institutions also have value. They are expensive. They have big overheads, and that's a problem where money is scarce. But then, how can we save some of the value and some of the robustness of big institutions that are, I think, beneficial for journalism at large, and transform it into like a 3-person team? Is maybe you can.
Yeah, and maybe then think a little bit more about shared services with all these tiny entities. Just building the same infrastructure that a big publishing house has for these tiny organizations. I think that's really, a possibility which makes it much more viable to have all these smaller organizations. But that's a side note.
Maybe on these small organizations, what we learned from these 2 calls we had, we were really surprised that the level of skills on the business side is so low in most of these organizations. And I was really surprised. And because they are small, they mostly invest in journalistic staff. They want more reporters to write and report. And they maybe have one business person who does it part-time. And then it's not going to work. It's going to fail. So
I think, donors should just focus more on the business side. It's the only solution, because otherwise they will be working against these developments.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you underlined it, because that's when we decided we need to do upskilling too. We not only have to give them money, we also need to upskill them on the business side, especially the smaller ones you mentioned. They need that really.
And sometimes we just fund a publisher. Say, okay, listen, you need a commercial person in your organization to really operate the things that you want to do. Don't do this as journalists, because you need your focus in chasing this, these corrupt, politicians, and just leave somebody to do these kind of things. Because journalists think sometimes that they can do all these things themselves. It's really not a good idea sometimes.
Yeah.
Peter.
Just 2 points on this. One is, I think it's true. When you get into journalism, you are passionate about writing articles and doing interviews or exposing corruption, and that this is your thing. And okay, maybe you were, I'm like smart enough to do whatever, but these are different roles and different jobs and different skill sets. On the other hand, if you have a fancy MBA from a fancy school and you spent already 150,000 euros on getting this qualification, you're not going to go to work for a media company, because for you as an individual, the risk versus reward is not really great. You'll work for some multinational and make a lot of money. So I think, yes, here there is a lot of capacity building to do. Another thing, I think I'm also like on there's a JX fund, which is Journalism Exile Fund from Germany, and there is a lot of people, because in exile everything is even more difficult than all the very easy things that we described. And then there is a lot of tech innovation on the side. So you have like a media outlet, and then they develop technology to do VPNs, virtual private networks, that enables them to bypass censorship. And this actually becomes the product that they sell. They fund their journalism through doing that, or to do podcasting technology or payment that circumvents the restrictions of the governments which they fled. And so I think especially in the exile, but I think increasingly elsewhere in Europe, you'll see these hybrids where there is journalistic content and content production, but there is some technology on the side. And of course, this remains to be seen, because technology is good. And that's another area where like newsrooms, we're great on technology. And sometimes they are not. But this is what we're seeing, what I am seeing.
One question to all of you is like, are you approached by investors of different kind of capital, and what are the questions they are asking you, or the fears, the interests they're mentioning?
Well, for us, it's from individuals up to large foundations like Volkswagen Foundation, which is a partner now, or MacArthur Foundation, which is a partner now. And they all have missions. They want to, in this case, support democracy like MacArthur, or they want to support science like Volkswagen. But they realize that whatever their first funding topic, journalism needs to be their second, because they can only reach their goals in their first topic if there is something there which explains what's going on in science or democracy to the people, which is a trusted source of information which everyone can rely on. So they turn to funding journalism because they realize there's kind of no success possible in their first topic if it's not really communicated in a trustful way to the people. So they have a lot of questions. They come from funding democracy or science or other parts, and they basically use the news, but they don't know how the news are being made, what to look for, and so their main questions are mostly reputation. That's why they come to a pooled fund, because then it's not their fault if something goes wrong, it's my fault. And also they want to pool their funding, because as an individual, if you fund one news organization, it's a one-off thing. They will most probably burn it real quickly. But if you do it together, and if you give bigger tickets, then there's a higher chance that they actually come up with a sustainable model in these 2 or 3 funding years.
Mm-hmm. Any other relations or dialogues?
Yeah, well,
with,
we work together with a lot of funds who are donating. We're working together with a lot of funds that are donating at the moment, and trying to get them involved with, for example, building these infrastructural services. And they were really interested. And I think, that is, but it's not an answer to your question. But I mean, we do have the network, but of course not talking to other funds for additional investment yet. Well, yet.
So, but Martin is primarily foundations you're talking to?
Foundations and impact investors.
And impact investors.
And a lottery.
And a lottery. Yeah.
And public entities. Yeah, like the government, and on local level, national and regional levels.
Mm-hmm. And you're talking to other funds?
Yeah, and there's a lot of family offices, but of course they have very much the problem of being, they don't want to be involved with media in exile and this kind of stuff, because it can be dangerous. And so that is kind of one of the things that they are scared about. So they also want to, a re-grantor. So I think there's a lot of potential there, to have more re-grantors and more pooled funding. Yeah. We're already doing it.
Thank you to us.
We need a
Whom are you working with or consulting?
So I think there is, again, just like in the US, there is a very big philanthropic tradition, and most of the media support, or all of the media support almost, is done through philanthropic funding. In Western Europe, there is already a lot less, but there is still private foundation, high net worth individual, family offices, and people interested in that. You reach kind of Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and then you go eastwards, there is even less philanthropic money. And then either these kind of Western foundations / individuals spend some of the money, like Civitates spends in Western Europe, but also spends in Eastern Europe. And there is more sort of public sector support, not from the local governments, but entities like Norway. Norway is a very rich country. I guess maybe they feel a little bit guilty about some of the things. I don't know, I'm just making a joke. But, so for example, Norway has a big fund in 13 European countries, most of them Portugal, and then all of Central Eastern Europe. And they do spend on non-profit media. You'll have the EU, and there is right now a big sort of fight or debate, because the next 7-year budget, the MFF, is under planning, and we'll see whether we can make sure there is money in journalism in that. But So we are talking to these entities, public sector, yes, impact investors like NDIF, but locally in Central and especially Eastern Europe, there is very little philanthropic money because there is less money and it's super risk averse. It would never fund. And to be honest, even the media companies, if there was a local high net worth individual saying, oh, let me fund you, the investigative newsroom would say, no, thank you. Because that money would probably come with strings attached and the newsrooms wouldn't want that.
Okay, thank you. Before we have time for one or two questions, I'd like to ask you about journalism and impact in its relationship or your approach, especially a lot what you mentioned already. You have a certain interest in revenues or returns on invests, but do you have other KPIs in terms of how you measure impact? Do you have criteria in selecting them? What is your idea and approach on impact?
Yeah, well, if we look at the journalistic companies that we're aiming at, they have to be influential and crucial in the media situation in their country. It's not always then the biggest, but also if they are representing an important voice that can't be heard otherwise, it's a very important company for us. So, but we're looking, of course, then to growth of reach, but also especially at the revenue building. So we set targets together with the company, and then we say, okay, listen, we're going to follow this, every month or every 2 months, and see what we can do or adjust. So we really are involved also with following this and helping to get to these targets. But it's especially reach. We never, of course, are involved in on the content side, but and revenues. Just working towards self-sustainability. That's the most important thing, and set targets on those things, and then specifically for their solution that they can work on. So one of them will make longer videos because they are really, easy for content syndication to other countries. We say, okay, instead of the 3-minute videos you're making now, you must make 10. We advise you to make 10-minute videos, and then you can sell them. So then we say, okay, how many videos will you make? How much revenues will that get to you, etc.
So very quantitative.
Yeah.
No impact reporting required.
Well, that is impact.
Okay, that's impact.
Yeah,
for you, it's enough
end,
impact.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it is. For us, it's the most important impact because then in the end they can just be there and not be dependent on donors any longer. And if they shift their focus, you can have a little bit of impact or a lot of impact, but you won't survive.
But is to the three of you is journalism an end as impact, or is journalism a means to an end? And where's the border between journalism has an agenda and therefore has an impact in a certain topic like climate change or equality or whatever? What's your stake on that?
Well, its pure existence is not enough. You need to have some measures to show the impact. And we have 25 selection criteria, and the most important one is that they actually provide a public service. It has to be a public value behind this journalism they do. And it also has to be transformational for the market itself, the business model, but also relevant to society. There are quality measures and all of that. But in the end, it has to also somehow make money, because the editorial independence comes from their commercial independence. So the content itself is kind of a prerequisite. There has to be quality journalism is the prerequisite to be actually fundable, but it's not enough. It also has to be some kind of a model behind it.
Mm-hmm. I believe that I enjoy reading good journalism for its own sake, but I think this is not a very good, or I think journalism for a very long time was like, oh, our value is self-evident. Like, oh, it's good for democracy, you should give us money in one way or the other. And I do believe that journalism is good good journalism is good for democracy. I'm not trying to argue this point, but I do think that the sector as a whole need to think a little bit about how how to show impact more clearly and make better arguments. Like, again, in the European context, everything in the EU now is about competitiveness, because this is what sort of the European public sphere is concerned about. If journalism can show itself as an economic enabler, as a vehicle for growth, it will be a lot more easy to convince new people that are not convinced yet by the journalism is good for democracy argument to pay for this or to fund this or to invest in this. There are other arguments. There's a lot of debates around European security and resilience. Maybe if we can show that journalism, when there is a crisis, in crisis response, it's very important to have good information because it saves lives, it saves money. I think these are the kind of arguments that I think journalism as a whole, the sector should explore more to show more quantifiable impact, because I think there are certain actors that can be convinced just by saying it's good journalism, it reaches people, it's a diverse range of voices, it's good. But I think there are more people that could be convinced with some other arguments that we haven't really managed to convince yet, but maybe we will.
And I think it will become much easier given the circumstances that are just currently happening in the world. I mean, everybody, gets much more sense of how important independent journalism is, because you see what's happening in the countries where there's no independent journalism.
Yeah, but in the end, the story of safe journalism or safe democracy is not a product promise. It's just an add-on or a context, but not enough.
It's the infrastructure for an informed society, and that's what we do it for. Yeah.
Do we have a question? 1, 2, 3. We take all the questions in one row and then we make the final round. There is one here. Please be precise.
I try to do fast. You mentioned that main aspect in media is people, yeah? And I would like to ask about artificial intelligence tools. And now they can replace not all people in media, but most of the staff in media. What do you think about it?
Okay.
If one journalist, high-skilled journalist, will just manage a lot of tools like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Midjourney, and so on and so forth, it will be not so costly. What do you think about it?
Thank you very much. Great question. What's next?
Thank you. My name is Jarek Boersma, founder of the Greenwood Digital Initiative. We talked about impact investment for journalistic companies and news organizations. And we talked about the structural changes and challenges that we see, like moving from analog to digital. But there are also market environmental changes and challenges that we see, such as a decrease in trust among consumers, trust in journalism, and trust in quality media. Are there certain impact investment programs, or do you have certain ideas how you want to protect journalism for these external environmental changes? And how do you intend to increase trust and protect trust in journalism?
Thank you. One more here.
I'm an impact investor. I run an impact fund, and for 5 years now in Croatia. And I was always dreaming that somebody comes to me with a proposal from this area. Nobody ever did. So I'm still and I wanted to ask, out of these 250 applications, why only 4, and who were the other ones? And I also wanted to comfort you that these business skills, this is a problem of every company. Yeah. Software companies, they pile on the engineers, like the news companies pile on journalists. Yeah. And it just needs to happen a click that the founder himself is crazy and enough to do it all and to level up the company.
Thank you very much. AI, would you invest in an AI hybrid company?
No,
Human
We're investing in AI tools.
Microphone.
Oh, microphone. We're investing in AI tools, and of course, AI and all these tech makes journalism more effective and efficient. But in the end, you need a very good journalist to ask the right questions to the right people and have the network to get towards these people. So I really don't believe that it's possible to get rid of all the journalists but one. But I do think there will be different structures. Yes.
And add on to the AI, or then I would ask you about the trust building.
I was going to the second one. I think there are structural changes, the ones that you described. I see the role of external funding. I don't think that we can go back to like previous methods or architecture. So, for example, one of the things I think that the trust in mainstream journalistic institutions are falling, but this is not in a vacuum. In the same time, trust in individual creators, let's call them influencers or whoever, is increasing. Now, I think this dynamic is not a trivial one. It has problems because, of course, these individuals don't have the same procedures, they don't have the same safeguards, they don't have the same approach. But also, I think it has benefits. It democratized access to public discourse more. You don't have that many gatekeepers. You have an interesting perspective or interesting voice. You can reach a big audience relatively easily. So I think one way to address this is to try to fund initiatives that are like forcing collaboration between different types of actors. So for example, individual creators and more mainstream newsrooms, so they can learn from each other. The newsrooms can learn about authenticity and direct access and how to like engage younger audiences, while maybe the individual creators can learn about fairness and public sort of interest mission and some of these other issues. So I think similarly, there has been various sort of areas of disruption because of tech, because of societal changes, because of some other factors. And I think all of us here are trying to address some of it, but I really don't think that we will go back to any configuration 20 years ago where you had big trusted newsrooms and people really took that information seriously, and or the other was on margins. You'll still have the New York Times, you'll still have like the paper of the record or two in big countries, and they have a meaningful role. But I think we have to, or at least I, accept the reality that some of the bigger institutions are going to fall away and will have new modes and new methods. And for me, what's interesting is how to like save the benefit of what the big institutions brought. Safety, again, the ability to go original content, to take risks, to protect their journalists, and transport that into these new modes of operation.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
We see that already from our applicants, especially in the regional market, because they are close to their audiences and they know what their needs are, and they usually build trust via sport results or other things. When you believe them, okay, they report on the sports results and on my local environment, then we also believe what they report on the global or in other topics. So we see that the local ones really win on trust right now, especially if they are user-centered. So there is the trend Peter described already happening. And on your, because I think we're over time, on your question, we had 250 applications in 2 calls, so there will be 8 more soon, but still it's a quite low number. And well, it's also because we only have about 10 million, so we have to really make really tough choices, and it's not us, it's a jury. And the jury decides. I don't make any decisions. It's an independent jury, and they decided these 4 were the ones that have the most, that have the best model, and they also want to experiment. We want to give experimental money.
Yeah, my question was actually, were these 245 so bad? Or maybe there was quality?
Well, I think if we had more money, we could have funded more, but not all 250.
Of course.
Okay, not all the 250 yet.
That's one better.
thank you very much. The whole topic is in development, very much in development, and I guess we follow up sooner or later next year. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.